Chapter 414 Battle of Numbers 2. Yeo Su-rin, a disciple of the harmonious immortal pavilion, known as the most mysterious among the 64 diviner pavilions, drew a circular shape with her large brush-shaped ritual tool. At that moment, a vermilion cloud arose and the space began to ripple. Boom. Beyond the rippling space, one being and numerous groups of swordsmen revealed themselves. As an extraordinary-looking old man standing at the front appeared, the eyes of the society members, who had been wondering what was happening, widened in surprise. And for good reason. Oh Cheonmu? The old man was Oh Cheonmu, the supreme spiritual sword craftsman, one of the seven heavens, considered the pinnacle of the current martial arts world and the master of spiritual sword sanctuary. Then, were the swordsmen behind him the warriors of spiritual sword sanctuary and the renowned sword experts staying at the sacred land of swordsmanship as guests? What on earth was happening? 3. Who possessed the body of young master Na Yul-riang, also looked at Oh Cheonmu with a bewildered expression at the appearance of this completely unexpected being, before glaring sharply at Mok Jang-un. You what exactly? In response to his reaction, Mok Jang-un spoke as if it was nothing unusual. I told you. You're not the only one fighting a battle of numbers. Shortly before returning to the Heaven and Earth Society, Seop Chun, who wanted to become Mok Jang-un's right-hand man and was the third guard captain of the Heaven and Earth Society's main building, asked in confusion. You're saying we should have Master O and the spiritual sword sanctuary warriors on standby? But my lord, if Master O enters with us, we could gain the upper hand from the start. Seop Chun couldn't understand Mok Jang-un's decision. This was a tremendous achievement. If the Heaven and Earth Society members learned that Mok Jang-un's true identity was the heavenly demon, the seventh heaven that had caused such a stir in the world, and that Oh Cheonmu, another of the seven heavens, was under his command, many would succumb to their prestige. Then they could gain momentum from the start and accelerate the conquest of the Heaven and Earth Society smoothly. My lord. Do you only know one thing and not two? At that moment, Mong Muyak, the son of the Heaven and Earth Society's vice leader who had his arms folded, clicked his tongue and chided him. Seop Chun frowned and asked. Not knowing too? What are you trying to say? It's not about momentum. If we bring Master Oh Cheonmu before we've even entered the sect or completed our mission, we'll face opposition from all factions from the moment we enter. Even the faction following the ill society leader would be the same. No. But isn't that treating the prestige of one of the pinnacles of the current martial arts world too lightly? Just Master Oh Cheonmu coming under our Lord's command. It's because it's not light that we're doing this. To minimize damage and take over the sect intact, we need to gain control from within, but bringing in a massive presence like Master Oh Cheonmu might increase resistance. Think about why our Lord isn't revealing his identity as the heavenly demon right away. Ahem. Seop Chun closed his mouth, seemingly understanding now. As Mong Muyak said, the moment they brought Oh Cheonmu and Mok Jang-un's reputation as the heavenly demon was revealed, all the Heaven and Earth Society members might unite in wariness and antipathy. If that happened, the plan to crumble the sect from within might become difficult. After convincing Seop Chun, Mong Muyak carefully said, But my lord, is it necessary to station Master O and all of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary out of the Society's sight? Couldn't we at least have Master O enter naturally, disguised with a human skin mask? Seop Chun agreed with Mong Muyak's words. Oh, my lord, that seems like a good method. If Master O suppresses his energy, hardly anyone except the ill society leader would be able to notice. At that moment, Mok Jang-un shook his head. No, we won't bring in Master O. What? It seems we should keep Master O and Spiritual Sword Sanctuary as a hidden card, so that there's not even the slightest chance of them being discovered. How? Because they probably have hidden cards too. My lord, no matter what, a trump card strong enough to counter Master O and Spiritual Sword Sanctuary within the Society? It's not just the Society, I think. Not just the Society. Yes. What does this mean? If we're dealing with the Society but it's not just the Society, does that mean there's something else inside? Mong Muyak, who had been puzzled, eventually spoke as if he had no choice. Since you say so, my lord, it seems you have some foresight that you've deeply considered. However, if we don't bring them in this time, Master O and Spiritual Sword Sanctuary will have to break through all the defenses in the Society's territory to enter. You must take that into account. There's no rule saying we have to enter through an existing gate. What? What do you mean? At this point, even his allies, including Mu, the master of spiritual sword sanctuary, couldn't understand what Mok Jiongun was saying. However, boom. The vermilion smoke gate that opened before their eyes crossed space and created an entrance through which the spiritual sword sanctuary warriors and the renowned sword experts staying as guests in the spiritual sword sanctuary could pass. Huh. Was this it? My lord, you really are. Mong Muyak, who was watching this through a window of the main building, stuck out his tongue. He had been wondering how on earth they were going to mobilize Spiritual Sword Sanctuary as a hidden card, and he couldn't help but be amazed by this unexpected, extraordinary and mysterious method. Rumble rumble. Led by Mu at the front, the Spiritual Sword Sanctuary and Spiritual Sword Sanctuary guests passed through the Vermilion Smoke Gate and entered the main square of the Heaven and Earth Society. Although they were only a few hundred in number, each of them was a sword master. And their leader, Mu, was one of the pinnacles of the current martial arts world, so his intimidating presence overwhelmed the surroundings. How did Master O? Isn't Spiritual Sword Sanctuary's stand supposed to be neutral? Aside from the mysterious smoke-created gate, what really caught everyone in doubt was, of course, the presence of Mu. Mu, one of the seven heavens, nodded as if following someone's instructions and then, Srung. Drawing his treasured sword, he shouted, "Swordsmen, draw your swords." Cha-cha-cha-chong. As soon as his words ended, hundreds of swordsmen simultaneously drew their swords. When the swordsmen drew their swords at the same time, for an instant, a sharp sword energy enveloped the entire square, revealing their might. Mu stepped forward and shouted, "It's the order of our lord, the heavenly demon. Cut down the real monsters wearing human skin. We obey the order." The society members couldn't hide their surprise at the resounding voices of the swordsmen. They were shocked by the appearance of Mu, one of the seven heavens, but they had been wondering why he and Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, who were supposed to be neutral and more faithful to their role as craftsmen, had appeared here. But when Mu called Mok Jiongun his lord, not only the society members under Mok Jiongun but all society members were instantly gripped by a shudder. By goodness! Did the supreme spiritual sword craftsman Mu just call him lord? Impossible! What? Does this mean he subjugated one of the pinnacles of the current martial arts world? It would have been shocking even if he had recruited the 8 stars who could be called the best in the martial arts world, but to have Mu, one of the current pinnacles of the martial arts world, as a subordinate was hard to believe even though the person himself said it. Indeed, he's not a man to be taken lightly. Chun Chu of the First Realm of the Secret Society raised the corner of her mouth wryly as she looked at Mok Joan. She had wanted to see that monster-like human in trouble, but instead, it seemed she was witnessing the Mokgon becoming uncomfortable. Until just a moment ago, the atmosphere of the battle situation that had died with her appearance was coming back to life. Indeed, the power of the reputation of the 6 heavens, no, the 7 heavens, couldn't be ignored. I thought it would end easily, but the opponent has been decided. Chun Chu moved, licking her lips and savoring the taste. Is it that woman? The aura she exudes is not ordinary. Thanks to Mok Jiongun's mental communication, Mu, who had been watching her, also raised his true chi and prepared to face her, who would be his only match. Cha-cha-cha-chong. Three Eyes' expression was not good as he continued to clash swords fiercely in the air without a moment's gap. He had intended to completely crush Hope with Chun Chu of the First Realm and the Jiangshi, and dominate the battle situation. But to think that this guy had a hidden card too. However, it didn't matter. The reason why Jiangshi made from those who had learned martial arts were scary was not only because they were much stronger than ordinary Jiangshi, but also because they didn't fear death, making it possible for them to fight to the death. With that number they could achieve several times more military exploits. If I hurry to subdue this guy and command them, I can overwhelmingly turn the tide of battle. Flinch. At that moment the eyeball on Three Eyes' forehead moved and focused somewhere. It was the southeastern direction where the Jiangshi were gathering. But in that southeastern direction about 200 martial artists could be seen, and they were Siep Chun and the third guard of the main building that he led. Those guys. Why is part of the main building's guard, which exists to protect the society leader, over there? And that wasn't the end of it. Clop clop. Clop clop. From somewhere, a massive creature with a dragon's head, red fur all over its body, and a body that looked like a mix between a dog and a cow the size of a house, could be seen charging towards the Jiangshi. That being was none other than the demonic beast Aliu. Quang. As Aliu, who charged with tremendous momentum like a wild boar, collided, the bodies of the Jiangshi flew in all directions as if they were straw dolls. The power was so strong that the Jiangshi's bodies breaking or shattering was just a bonus. The demonic beast was not called a demonic beast for nothing. Kiririk. These things that aren't even alive are fun to break. The demonic beast Aliu rampaged among the Jiangshi, trampling and sending them flying, hindering their advance. Papapak. Of course, it wasn't as if the Jiangshi were helplessly taking the hits. At some point, they tried to cling to Aliu's legs and body to prevent it from rampaging. However, Wairurik. Since they're dead, they won't blame this old man for using plenty of poison energy. Ho ho ho. Riding on the back of the demonic beast Aliu was Gyeong Sao with his 8 poison snake staff. As he swung his snake-shaped staff and sprayed a terrible poison energy, it was so strong that the bodies of the Jiangshi melted from the poison energy wherever it touched. The eyeball on Three Eyes' forehead sharpened terrifyingly. Where did those things pop out from? Even with variables, he thought he could turn the tide of battle anytime because the Heaven and Earth Society had been in the palm of his hand for a long time. But how many hidden cards does this guy have? It was completely beyond his prediction range. As the battle situation didn't change at all contrary to his plan, Three Eyes' composure disappeared and he revealed his uncomfortable mood. You're making things troublesome for me. Do you think this will change the result? Weren't you the one who said we should fight a battle of numbers? At Mok Jiongun's words, all 3 of Three Eyes' eyeballs focused on Mok Jiongun and turned cold. In response to his reaction, Mok Jiongun sneered and mocked. Whether it's by Yonghyun or the leader of the secret society, you're all just talk. Grind. At that moment, Three Eyes' eyes turned fierce. Normally, he wouldn't have fallen for an enemy's provocation like this. However, he couldn't contain his anger for a moment at the sight of a mere mortal who wouldn't even live 100 years daring to provoke him, on top of appearing out of nowhere and ruining the picture he had been painting until now. He had been avoiding fatal techniques because he had to resolve this due to his connection with Ryu Soul. But his mind had changed, just barely keeping him alive. It was at that very moment. Flinch. He had been thick with martial arts accumulated over a long time as if showing off, and hadn't shown even a slight gap with the coldness of the years. However, for a moment, a tiny gap appeared for the first time in Three Eyes' sword, which was engulfed in anger at Mok Jiongun's provocation. The gap was so small that it was difficult even to detect, but Mok Jiongun, who was concentrating all his nerves on this fight, didn't miss it. Twack. At that moment, Mok Jiongun's figure blurred and a black line appeared in the air. The sword speed of the single strike that concentrated all his power into one point was so fast that even a master would have difficulty perceiving it with the naked eye. However, Chaong. Three Eyes blocked the single strike that dug into that momentary gap. But because he was in a position opposite to the direction of the sword swing, he should have been in a position where he couldn't block it originally, yet he managed it by ignoring the pain of his muscles and joints breaking. You missed your only chance. Three Eyes sneered. Mok Jiongun's gaze was directed at his twisted muscles and protruding elbow bone. But what about this? Being a being that transcended humans, he could instantly recover his body with demonic power even with a body like this. Wairurik. Look, already the protruding bone is recovering. Shook. It was at that moment. Mok Jiongun let go of the demonic sword, evil commandment sword, and stabbed at the eye on his forehead with his left hand sword finger like lightning. It's useless. He was most wary of the third eye being attacked more than any other part. He tried to snatch and grab Mok Jiongun's left wrist holding the sword finger like lightning and break it. However, Kwaduk. At that moment, in the fleeting situation where their swords and hands were firmly stuck together, Mok Jiongun bit and tore off Three Eyes' Adam's apple. Chapter 4:15 Battle of Numbers 3. Papapapapak. Chachang. O Cheonmu, one of the 7 heavens and the master of spiritual sword sanctuary, inwardly stuck out his tongue. Although he had been cautious from the start due to her extraordinary aura, he had never experienced such a technique in his entire life. Chunchu of the First Realm appropriately mixed swift palm techniques with claw techniques, but that wasn't all. She used a strange technique which was Kwang. Instead of her palm force forming a strong energy, it caused invisible explosions. The energy compressed in the air and then exploded, and the condensed energy was so strong that before he could grasp it, his left shoulder was hit and he almost lost his arm. Twack. In response, Oh Cheon-mu split the area with his sword energy whenever he saw signs of energy concentrating. This way the palm force would be cut before it could condense, significantly reducing the explosive power. Pa-pa-pa-pak. Chai-chong. Chunchu lightly blocked Oh Cheon-mu's sword and opened her mouth. Not bad, old man. To adapt to the Hidden Shadow Explosive Palm so quickly. Hidden Shadow Explosive Palm? A fitting name. It was a bizarre technique that would have been difficult to counter if he hadn't reached the Profound Realm, considered supreme in handling energy. Her technique was suitable for indiscriminate slaughter. I heard rumors that among the seven heavens, you have the least actual combat experience and only adopted other sword techniques, strong in theory but lacking in skill. I won't deny it. Though she said it to provoke him, Oh Cheon-mu calmly accepted it. It's not working. Chunchu licked her lips. She might not know, but Oh Cheon-mu, who had decided to serve Mok Jae-eun as his lord, had quite a few practice matches that were close to real combat on his way here. This was for Mok Jae-eun to adapt to his rapidly increasing martial prowess in a short period, but Oh Cheon-mu also significantly increased his combat experience by competing with masters of the life and death realm. Cha-chong. Not being flustered even by the Hidden Shadow Explosive Palm, as expected of the pinnacle of the current martial arts world. Chunchu, who had been inwardly sticking out her tongue, soon grinned and unleashed her secret technique. As she took a stance to strike down with her palm from above. Hidden Shadow Overlapping Strike. Go. Above. Oh Cheon-mu tried to cut the energy gathering above with his sword energy. But that wasn't all. He felt another energy gathering above the energy, and it wasn't just one or two. Even just the energy he could feel was 3 no, even more than that. Which means, is she overlapping invisible energy? It seemed that even condensing it once would require considerable concentration, but overlapping it repeatedly could probably be called a secret technique. In response, Oh Cheon-mu made a gesture of pulling with his left-hand sword finger while swinging his sword energy. Then 4 swords flew up from the ground and created strong energy. It was the sword energy controlled by Chi. Boom. Oh Cheon-mu rotated his left hand holding the sword finger widely in that state. Then the 4 sword energy controlled by Chi rotated like windmills, creating a shield made of strong energy. Simultaneously, Kwang, Kwang, Kwang. The condensed energies exploded above the shield. TSK. As tremendous explosions occurred one after another, Oh Cheon-mu inwardly clicked his tongue. On the surface, she looked like a peerlessly beautiful woman in her early 20s. However, it was no exaggeration to say that the power she possessed was on par with the seven heavens, considered the pinnacle of the current martial arts world. How could such a monster appear in the martial arts world without anyone knowing? Kwang, 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 Jojo-jik, Pachang-tung-chong. The continuing explosions overlapped, increasing their power. As a result, 3 out of the 4 swords that had been rotating like windmills to block the explosions with sword energy controlled by Chi couldn't withstand the force and shattered in an instant. Flinch. Not yet. The energy was overlapping one more time. It was the 7th time, and he couldn't even imagine how strong the explosive power would be when all of this condensed. However, Oh Cheon-mu calmly, Twaryuk, added energy to the fragments of the broken sword hilts and added them to the rotation of the remaining sword energy controlled by Chi. The rotation of the sword energy controlled by Chi, now with added metal fragments imbued with strong energy, became even more dense and intricate. Kwang. As the explosion burst, the remaining sword energy controlled by Chi tried to block the force of the explosion but eventually couldn't withstand the heat and shattered, even vaporizing into smoke. If I'm going to strike at a weak point, it's now. In that instant, Oh Cheon-mu threw his body towards the subsiding explosion. Thus, Oh Cheon-mu, who had become a sword himself with the subtleties of the extreme sword, split the explosion and broke through it. Twack. Seeing Oh Cheon-mu emerge after breaking through the overlapped explosions, Chunchu of the First Realm hurriedly threw her body backward while unleashing palm force. Pop-pop-pop-pop-pack. However, Oh Cheon-mu's figure, having gained momentum, was truly unstoppable. Oh Cheon-mu's sword finger, which had split the palm forces in an instant, aimed for the center of her chest. In response, she stretched out her hand to block Oh Cheon-moo's sword finger. Puke. Oh Cheon-moo's sharp sword finger pierced through Chuanchu's hand, but she also put all her strength into it, planting both feet firmly on the ground, so Pyong. Oh Cheon-moo's exquisite single strike couldn't reach her chest. However, due to the impact of the two supreme experts colliding, the surrounding area was almost devastated by the wind pressure of energy. This woman is really strong. Oh Cheon-moo had gained many insights that had been blocked while competing with Mok Jae-eun. Nevertheless, he couldn't find a decisive gap. It was a strength that could only be admired. This was the same for Chunchu of the First Realm. Don't underestimate humans. She stuck out her tongue, remembering the warning given by Kang Yom, who was also of the First Realm. Although they had reached the pinnacle of martial artists, she thought they would inevitably be lacking compared to beings like herself who had lived for a long time. However, after competing like this, her thoughts changed. Seeing beings who couldn't even live 100 years become this strong, the potential of humans was beyond that of the 2 eyebrows and 4 eyes beings. Paruru. The two, having entered a contest of internal energy, maintained that state and exerted force towards each other. Whoever yielded here would suffer a fatal injury. But then the corner of Oh Cheon-moo's mouth rose. Puzzled by this, Chunchu asked, "Why are you smiling? It seems the lords we each serve are about to be decided." Decided? At this she looked up. In the air she could see Mok Jae-eun biting and tearing at Three Eyes' throat just as they were facing off. Biting the throat? Chunchu was dumbfounded at the sight. How could he think of biting his opponent's throat in that situation? Although she didn't fully understand humans despite observing them for a long time, they were beings who mainly used their hands and maintained a certain level of dignity, unlike the 2 eyebrows and 4 eyes beings or beasts. Therefore, even in a life-or-death battle, they didn't fight like beasts in that way, but the sight of biting off the Mokgon's throat was like that of a ferocious beast. She became flushed, as if excited at the sight of him biting off the Adam's apple and then chewing it. Oh Cheon-moo frowned at this sight. "I can't understand how you can be like that when your master is being defeated." Defeated? The match is decided. With his throat's Adam's apple torn off, he was as good as dead. However, at Oh Cheon-moo's words that the match was decided, Chunchu instead sneered as if it was absurd and said, "That might be true for an ordinary human." At her meaningful words, Oh Cheon-moo felt an ominous feeling. It was at that very moment. Three Eyes, who had possessed Na Yulriang's body, whose throat's Adam's apple had been torn off, instead of suffering in that state, broke Mok Jae-eun's wrist that was holding him with a smiling face. Wuduk. Mok Jae-eun's broken wrist bone soon pierced through the flesh and protruded outwards. What? Oh Cheon-moo's eyes widened at this sight. With his throat's Adam's apple torn off, there should have been no possibility of survival, yet he was smiling and acting like that in that situation. It could be called madness no less than Mok Jae-eun's ferocity. But then Mok Jae-eun, with his wrist broken, headbutt Three Eyes' forehead in that state. Three Eyes, who tried to avoid his third eye being hit as much as possible, threw his head back with all his might, but because their bodies were fixed in that situation, Kwang. Three Eyes' left eye socket was crushed and his eyeball was smashed. This time, unable to withstand the pain, Three Eyes tried to separate his body by removing the sword that was pressed against Mok Jae-eun. However, there was no way Mok Jae-eun would let him go. With his left arm, whose wrist bone was protruding and seemed impossible to grip properly, he grabbed Three Eyes' wrist and let go of the demonic sword, Evil Commandment Sword, aiming for the third eye on his forehead. Shook. As Mok Jae-eun's sword finger aimed, suddenly a bright light poured out from Three Eyes' third eye. The immense light that suddenly poured out was so bright that it was radiance itself, causing Mok Jae-eun to close his eyes due to the burning pain. Chiaik. Papapapapak. In that instant, Three Eyes repeatedly kicked Mok Jae-eun and finally managed to create distance. The eye on his forehead that had emitted radiance suddenly became dull, and the color of its pupil lost its light like the eyes of a dead person. Tuaruriak. However, thanks to creating distance, Three Eyes, who could circulate demonic energy, rapidly began to recover his torn Adam's apple, the broken bones around his left eye socket and his left eyeball. He could fully recover this in less than 10 counts. Twak. At that moment, Mok Jae-eun's Evil Commandment Sword flew towards his shoulder and dug in. It was sword energy controlled by Chi, dyed with black strong energy. With his only open right eye with its golden pupil, he could see Mok Jiongun extending his sword finger towards him with his eyes closed. Huh. The massive amount of light emitted all at once from the third eye's demonic power would have caused his corneas to burn and be damaged. When one of the five senses suddenly disappears, the other senses are also affected and become unstable. But he revived those other senses in an instant? This guy really isn't human-like. Damn it. Partly because of the connection of Spirit Servant with Ryu Sowol, he had been avoiding inflicting fatal injuries, and also because this new body couldn't fully exert his power yet, but it had been a very long time since an opponent had pushed him this far. Then a voice echoed in his head. There's a better way than cutting the connection. A better way? Yes. Let's take over his body. His body. At this thought, Three Eyes' eyes, except for the eye on his forehead, narrowed. Come to think of it, there was no need to cut the connection. This guy possessed a body far superior to Na Yulriang's. He had been angry, thinking that this guy had interfered with his grand plan and blocked his connection, but thinking about it coldly, it might have turned out well. For Sowol, whose resentment was strong enough to become a spirit servant, to become his spirit servant, she must have trusted him considerably. If he could take over such a guy's body. Soon, the corners of Three Eyes' mouth rose slyly. He had quickly come to a conclusion. But at that very moment, Esirururiuk. As Mok Jiongun repeatedly stepped on the air, his figure suddenly began to split into three with the wind. Seeing this sight, Three Eyes frowned. Is this possibly? He had numerous memories. Among them were a few memories of those who had troubled him when he thought he had become absolute. This body-splitting technique that Mok Jiongun was displaying was one of them. Although it didn't seem perfect, this body-splitting technique was clearly the secret technique of the vanished Matchless City. But that wasn't the end. Wuduk. As the three split Mok Jiongis regulated their breathing, the surrounding energy gathered and circulated throughout their bodies. Then their muscles swelled up more firmly, their bodies turned red and steam flowed out. Shuyu. Seeing this, Three Eyes was reminded of that monstrous clan guarding the Tang family and the Forbidden Land. What exactly is this guy? How is he simultaneously mastering the secret techniques of the few beings that had troubled him over his long years? Chapter 416, Battle of Numbers 4. Three Eyes was not an immortal being, but had achieved longevity by moving through numerous bodies. This being, known to be different from other Imimangyang and considered extremely ominous, was not inherently strong from the beginning. At the moment of its birth it was infinitely weak. However, by moving through numerous bodies and absorbing the power, memories and experiences of its hosts, it grew stronger day by day at a rapid pace. After a long time passed this way, Three Eyes became comparable to demonic beasts, which could be considered quite high-ranking among the Imimangyang, and began to take pride in its own power. Three Eyes had strong desires because it had absorbed human memories and emotions. Therefore it wanted everything and desired to rule. But no matter how strong it became, it couldn't do everything alone. What caught Three Eyes' eye were humans who had been serving as hosts. Humans were beings that could accept all energies in the myriad things of the universe and had the most outstanding potential talents, but their short lifespan made their limitations clear. Despite having intelligence and dignity, there were no beings as easy to rule as them. If it could use these short-lived beings, it thought it could rule the world as it wished. However, Three Eyes' grand ambition had to be put aside for a long time due to one shock. How could this be? Even though it had developed ambition, Three Eyes knew there was a line it should never cross. That line was the 6 demons, infinitely close to divine beasts and called the 6 kings of the Imimangyang. They were literally transcendent beings, so Three Eyes thought it was an unreachable realm no matter how many beings' powers it absorbed. But it saw it. It saw a human fighting barehanded against one of the 6 demons, considered the strongest in power among those in the absolutely unreachable realm. Their fight was enough to shatter mountains, flood rivers and change the terrain. It was truly a battle of gods. Dash. The sight was utterly terrifying. It was the first time in its life it had seen such a strong human, a monster beyond imagination. After seeing this, Three Eyes lost its will to fight, or rather its ambition, for the first time in its life. How much time had passed? Three Eyes later learned. That terrifying and even frightening monstrous human was a being born from the gathering of heaven and earth's energy and by chance. Such a being that deviated from the natural order could not stay in the world for long. As Three Eyes had predicted, that monstrous humans soon disappeared, and Three Eyes reawakened its suppressed ambition. More time passed and Three Eyes grew even stronger. As planned, it drew many humans under its wing and made them worship it. At this rate, it seemed it could achieve its ambitions soon. However, before long it encountered another new wall. It wasn't human. It was the 6 demons. Most of the 6 demons were so strong that they had no interest in humans, but among these 6 demons, a being particularly emotional about humans appeared. It was originally not a Imimangniang being, but a being born from the gathering of 5 nature spirits called the 5 spirits. However, one of those 5 spirits, which had become a dragon, failed to achieve the enlightenment and fell into corruption. Thus, that being took one of the 6 demons' positions, and the Imimangniang called this corrupted dragon, the Jiao Dragon Demon King 1. The Jiao Dragon Demon King, who had been sealed by a sage for a long time, tried to destroy the world by moving numerous Imimangniang once released from its seal. It seemed the world would end at the hands of the Jiao Dragon Demon King, as the sages who could have stopped such a being had left the human world. But it was incredibly coincidental. What stood against this Jiao Dragon Demon King was none other than a human. It wasn't a being born from the gathering of heaven and earth's energy and by chance, but one who had grown strong by drawing out potential through numerous hardships. Watching the Jiao Dragon Demon King being annihilated by a human, Three Eyes fell into deep contemplation. Although they were extremely rare, humans' potential was truly limitless. Seeing monsters born among beings who couldn't even live long, at a level that deviated from the natural order, its thoughts changed somewhat. Rule. The very possibility of humans felt dangerous. Could it smoothly rule over them? Wouldn't it be better to exclude humans? But if a being that could become its nemesis appeared during the process of exclusion, it would follow the same path as the 2 demons. So Three Eyes decided to watch humans more while building its power. As it watched, Three Eyes realized one thing. I see. Those 2 beings who had faced the 6 demons were truly special cases that didn't arise easily. Such humans are not born easily. Therefore, Three Eyes thought that if it excluded only those beings who might develop even a little potential, it could sufficiently rule over humans and, if necessary, easily destroy them. The humans with noticeable potential to develop were primarily those who inherited the blood of those beings. Mok Jiangun's figure split into 3 with a wind-like movement. The moment Three Eyes saw this, it could instinctively realize. That was undoubtedly the secret technique of the Peerless Fortress. How did he? The Peerless Fortress had disappeared on the day of the Great Calamity. It thought it had dried up all the seeds related to it, so how did he learn that technique? But this wasn't the end. Wuduk. As the 3 split Mok Jiangyis regulated their breathing, the surrounding energy gathered and circulated, then their muscles swelled up more firmly, their bodies turned red and steam flowed out. Shuyu. Seeing this, Three Eyes was reminded of that monstrous clan guarding the Tang family in the Forbidden Land. I am Yu Mujik. As you can see, I eat and sleep here guarding this place. But you're not human, are you? How did you get in here? Although it thought the descendants would have weakened even if they inherited that being's blood, they were still a clan with monstrous power. Even though it wasn't at full strength, it had made Three Eyes retreat. But what was important now wasn't the past. How was he mastering the secret techniques of the few beings that had checked Three Eyes over its long years? Yuduk. This guy was truly irritating. But getting excited here would ruin everything. If it could take over his body, it would be able to use the connection with Ryu Sowol, and naturally learn how he had mastered their techniques. Suk. As Three Eyes threw its body backward and stretched out its right hand, one of the swords it had dropped floated up and was sucked into its hand. In that state, as Three Eyes made a gesture of swinging its sword finger upward, Parururu. The weapons of the casualties on the square's floor, such as swords and sabers, began to tremble and float upward. The swords that had risen this way shot up all at once as if they were arrows. Although they weren't imbued with strong energy, they were filled with power from demonic energy, making their momentum tremendous. Pop-pop-pop-pop-pop-pack. The soaring swords rushed all at once towards Mok Jiangun, whose figure had split into 3. Numerous swords flew like waves, and as one of Mok Jiangun's split bodies waved its sword finger, pop-pop-pop-pop-pop-pang. The swords stopped midway as if they had hit something. Then the swords began to fall to the ground as they were. Seeing this, Three Eyes clicked its tongue. To cut off the control of the swords I was handling with demonic energy in a flash-like manner. This guy's application skills are not ordinary. But it thought he would easily block this anyway. It was just to create some distance for a moment. To use this technique it needed some distance, so it just needed to keep him in that spot. Suk, chuk, chuk. With that level of spell technique skill, one wouldn't need hand seals or would only need simplified ones. But for this technique alone, it had no choice but to form proper hand seals. The moment it formed the hand seals, flinch. Mok Jaeongun's eyes sharpened. This was because Three Eyes' demonic energy had risen incomparably higher than before. It felt like it was drawing out all its demonic energy without thinking about the consequences. Was it trying to settle things? Paruru. Meanwhile, Three Eyes' arms forming the hand seals shook violently and its blood vessels bulged out. This was because, as Mok Jaeongun had expected, Three Eyes was drawing out all its demonic energy, ignoring the body's overload. For a fleeting moment, a voice echoed in Three Eyes' mind. Will you discard it? Didn't you agree? What a waste. It's hard to find a body of this caliber. It's not as good as that one. True. Accommodating your stubbornness is coming to an end. Once you get what you want, you'll need to focus on the grand plan. I'll keep my promise. Good. The original goal was young Master Na Yulriang's body. Although he didn't inherit the blood of the heaven vein, his talent could be said to be even greater than the current society leader of this generation. If it could take over his body, it could not only carry out the grand plan but also reconnect with her. Because they would be sword siblings rather than rivals, they could become even closer. That's why it wanted this body, but not anymore. This is even better. Although it didn't know how they had formed a spirit-servant connection, those two had formed an alliance for revenge and must have overcome hardships together for this purpose. There was no need to build an alliance by taking over Na Yulriang's body. With that body alone, it could naturally win So-Wul's heart even without tampering with the memories. The corners of Three Eyes' mouth stretched to its ears in an eerie smile, showing madness. That concerned look of hers, recovering depleted spirit power below the square, would now be directed towards itself. The role of this body was set. It just needed to show wretchedness to make him stand out more. Pusuk. Pusuk. As it drew out all the demonic energy in its body, Na Yulriang's body, unable to withstand it, had its energy channels bursting and breaking in various places. However, Three Eyes didn't care about this. Although it was a shame, it had no attachment to a body it would use once and discard anyway. Pong. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun's three split figures simultaneously tried to fly towards it. Then Three Eyes opened its palms and clapped. Vic. At that instant, all the demonic energy that had spread around gathered at once and began to press on the space around Mok Jaeongun. Go! This is. The demonic energy pressing on the entire space was so strong that Mok Jaeongun's movements slowed down significantly, as if he had fallen into water. It even gave the feeling that time was slowing down. Great Void Sealing Technique. This technique is an ancient forbidden technique that a practitioner who has reached a certain high level uses by staking their life. Because its conditions are so demanding and it requires staking one's life, it's practically a technique that even the most outstanding diviners can't use, but not for Three Eyes. Could just change to a new body if the dead one was discarded. Even the arrogant assassin king of the sea fell to this technique. Although it's only a half-complete technique, you, a human, can absolutely not escape it. If one more condition is added here, the technique would be complete. However, its purpose was not to really trap Mok Jaeongun. It was to buy time to move to his body. Pat. As Three Eyes waved its hand, a hazy mist arose around, obscuring the view in all directions. As the view suddenly became obscured, Chong Ryong, who had been focusing on their battle while recovering spirit power, rose from her seat in surprise. Mortal. Thus, in the obscured mist, Three Eyes leisurely entered this space and flew towards Mok Jaeongun. Whether he split his form into three or used whatever technique, as long as it had deployed the Great Void Sealing Technique by staking the practitioner's life, he couldn't easily escape this space. By now, two of Mok Jaeongun's forms had disappeared, and only one body remained. Three Eyes approached Mok Jaeongun like this. Since he couldn't move, trapped by the technique, it could just change bodies right away. Asasaiaik. Three Eyes smiled eerily and said, "I'll take that body." As it brought its left hand to Mok Jaeongun's head and its right hand to the eyeball embedded in its forehead. Suk. It was the moment its left hand touched Mok Jaeongun's head. That's when it happened. Quack. Kek. Mok Jaeongun's hand, which Three Eyes thought absolutely couldn't move as desired due to the technique, grabbed Three Eyes' neck like lightning. Three Eyes hastily tried to break free. But no matter how much it tried to remove Mok Jaeongun's hand gripping its neck, it was immovable. How could he move while the technique was being deployed? It was at this moment of puzzlement. You lowly creature still coveting what belongs to others. The moment it heard the voice, the eyeball on Three Eyes' forehead began to tremble madly. Chapter 4:17, Battle of Numbers 5. You lowly creature still coveting what belongs to others. The voice coming from Mok Jaeongun had a different atmosphere. The moment it heard this, the eyeball on Three Eyes' forehead trembled violently. In a fleeting moment, the third eyeball, turning reddish-black, spoke into his mind with a voice full of bewilderment. This can't be. What's going on? Didn't you say it definitely wasn't? It wasn't a long exchange. But Three Eyes had never forgotten this unique atmosphere. It was darkness itself, like an abyss of unfathomable depth, and close to chaos that evoked destruction. Above all, the absolute intimidation that overwhelmed all beings instilled in him a fear he had never felt even from the 6 demons. It's him. It must be him. No. This is strange. There's clearly no core. Core or not, the core is their foundation. The absence of a core means death for them, the annihilation of existence. Then what is this guy in front of us? Are you saying he's become a ghost? A ghost, such a thing? At that very moment, tsu. Hup. The blood vessels in Three Eyes' neck, held by Mok Jaeongun's hand, turned black and some kind of erosion occurred. Three Eyes raised demonic energy to push back the invading erosion, but once the energy pushed in, it was unstoppable. This energy. It's certain. It wasn't just similar, it was that energy from back then. Then a voice echoed in Three Eyes' mind. Were you sharing consciousness? You. Three Eyes' 3 eyeballs shook simultaneously. He realized something was eroding, but didn't know it would invade their connected consciousness. At Mok Jaeongun's voice, Three Eyes spoke with an angry tone. So it was you after all? It was a question loaded with many implications. To this question, Mok Jaeongun's voice with its changed atmosphere continued, seemingly unconcerned. How foolish. Not realizing your own greed is being exploited. Greed? Did you just say greed? Ha! Three Eyes burst into mad laughter. Then, stopping abruptly and calming his excitement, he spoke in a cold voice. Yes, the emotion of desperately wanting something can also be called greed. But how dare you, who arbitrarily took what belongs to me, speak to me about greed? How novel. What? You're showing well how foolish attachment to something you can't have can destroy oneself. Of course, that's why your eyes and consciousness could be connected. You dare. Dare? Three Eyes' 3 eyeballs shook violently. The ominous energy that was eroding was spreading throughout his entire body, and as his body stiffened, he felt pain as if each nerve was being stabbed with a needle. Don't be mistaken that we're on the same level just because I'm exchanging words with you. He had let his guard down. Thinking that he wouldn't be able to move, caught in the ancient secret technique of the Great Void Sealing technique that had even sealed the Assassin King of the Sea, had worsened the situation. Another consciousness in Three Eyes' mind urged. Don't be swayed by him. We must somehow detach him to prevent the erosion from progressing further. We'll block the nerve pain. At that moment, black capillaries sprouted from the eyeball on Three Eyes' forehead and burst. The consciousness of the third eye cried out in agony. How? I don't know why you still maintained human consciousness, but did you think I'd just deal with the host and move on like before? What exactly are you? How without a core? I am merely a remnant. A remnant? You don't need to know. You just need to disappear. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun's eyes narrowed. Then one of his eyebrows raised. The reason was that he realized something while trying to eliminate these 2 parasitic consciousnesses occupying Na Yulriang's body. It's not the real consciousness. Three Eyes, who had been showing a pained face and complaining of pain, began to raise the corners of his mouth slyly. Then, stopping his groans of pain, he burst into laughter. Kuhahaha. It looked as if he was letting out a laugh of triumph. Was the appearance of suffering from erosion just an act? Mok Jaeongun, who had been staring intently at Three Eyes' forehead, spoke not in consciousness but aloud. Did you transfer the separated consciousness as it was? No, did you implement an almost identical eye to connect the consciousness? You're quick. As expected, you're impressive. To notice this already, even though I've eroded you. Huh. Mok Jae-eun looked at him with an expression of disbelief. He had seen many types of people, but this was the first time he'd encountered such a being. It looked real, but this wasn't real. The beings called Three Eyes parasitize others, so their main body is the eye, which can be called the center of demonic energy. But this eye was not the main body but rather implemented, that is, replicated, the demonic energy, consciousness and memories in an identical form. However, Mok Jae-eun's burst of laughter wasn't just because he sent a replicated consciousness pretending to be the main body. Was implementing even the separated consciousness to definitely deceive that it wasn't the main body? That could be one reason, but it has many uses. Uses. Humans are greatly influenced by these things called emotions. Especially the more extreme the emotion. For instance, things like greed, anger, sadness. These are great driving forces even for me. Kuduk. Kuduk. Three Eyes' eroding eyeball returned to its original state. Pushing back. Go. The energy that had spread throughout the upper body also returned to normal. And Three Eyes' demonic energy was rising rapidly. The demonic energy was circulating in reverse, not forward, and increasing twofold. This was the reverse meridian circulation technique. Three Eyes spoke with a mad smile. From the moment I felt your energy, I thought we'd meet soon. How much do you think I've prepared for that moment? You've made good use of the time given, I see. I'll take that as a compliment. You wingless king. I don't know how you've come to dwell in a mere human body, but since you called yourself a remnant, I'll take all that remaining power for myself. So that was your goal. It was our goal. I'll fulfill my companion's long-cherished wish and lessen your interference as well. So it was him after all? It was a choice tantamount to annihilation, but he didn't believe it easily. Mok Jae-eun shook his head. Then, do you think it will end with just interference by doing something to me? Of course not. I'll pull you down with my own hands. Pull me down. Kuhuhu. Did you think we'd be dragged along by the likes of you who try to reign by playing God? This world is mine. Absolute greed. For a long time Three Eyes had wanted everything. But knowing it wasn't the time, he had simply bided his time, building up the power to easily break through the walls whenever he encountered them. Now all preparations were complete. There would be no more biding time. When the grand plan is realized, everyone will realize that the day of great calamity was merely the beginning. It must be quite the preparation to call it a grand plan. I look forward to it. It is worth looking forward to. It's just a shame. I wanted to show you too the world that's about to change. As the erosion was almost completely undone, Three Eyes firmly grasped Mok Jae-eun's wrist. Then, a thread made of red light flowed from the wrist, instantly binding his body starting from the wrist. Wairurik. Quack. Still, I'll put your body to good use. Suk. Three Eyes brought his hand to his forehead. Then he casually pulled out the third eyeball on his forehead. Sijek. After pulling out the eye like that, he tried to bring it to Mok Jae-eun's forehead. But then, I wanted to find out where the main body is, but since you've divided your consciousness into several places, that'll be difficult. At those words, the focus of the eyeball Three Eyes was holding wavered. At that very moment, pong. The thread made of red light binding Mok Jae-eun's entire body broke so easily it was almost pathetic. Realizing something had gone wrong, Three Eyes tried to pull his body back, but Mok Jae-eun's hand grabbed his face once again. From that grasping hand, an incredibly ominous black energy flowed out again and began to dig into his entire face. Three Eyes spoke in a bewildered voice. Could it be? Did you think you could do something with just a replicated consciousness that's not even real and some squeezed-out power? Tsu. The energy's erosion spread throughout his body at a speed incomparable to just moments ago. The speed was so fast that even the demonic energy he had explosively increased through the reverse meridian circulation technique couldn't block it. Three Eyes spoke with a chilled face. You deceived me. It's not my way. It's another me's way. What? Your arrogant appearance was irritating, but thanks to it I learned what you were thinking and where the real consciousness might be, even if scattered. So it wasn't a bad choice. Tsu. Already about 70% of his body had been eroded. Soon, when his entire body was eroded, the consciousness controlling the body would be annihilated, and it would be him who would have his remaining energy stolen. He thought he could repay the grudge from back then with a consciousness that was no different from a separate body, but even having lost all power, he was still befitting of a being that once stood at the pinnacle of those monstrous creatures. Pizzik. Three Eyes sneered and raised the corners of his mouth as he spoke. Right. If it had ended so easily, I would have been quite disappointed. That disappointment too will soon disappear. Don't get cocky. Do you think this is the end? At most, this is just a body I've transferred my consciousness into. You have a long tongue. Nearly 90% of his body had been eroded. Three Eyes spoke with difficulty, his body trembling. Will desperately seek me. Paruru. Before he could finish speaking, the blood vessels in the third eyeball Three Eyes was holding bulged out grotesquely. Realizing what Three Eyes was trying to do, Mok Jiongun grabbed the eyeball. Strong heat could be felt from the eyeball. Even if it was an eye with replicated consciousness, wouldn't he rather self-destruct and be annihilated rather than suffer more humiliation? The heated eyeball burst as it was. Since he had already concentrated all his energy to protect his hand, there was no big explosion. Mok Jiongun opened his hand and scattered the black ashes. He couldn't absorb the energy contained in the eyeball at the end as it self-destructed, but he had absorbed the power remaining inside as he had eroded the entire body and annihilated the separated consciousness. Ha. Ha. But breathing sounds could be heard from the body. He's lucky. It was Na Yelriang who had managed to cling to life even though his body had been taken. However, because the body had been pushed far beyond its limits and lost all internal energy, it was now no different from a body that could no longer use martial arts. Mok Jiongun stared at Na Yelriang, who was barely breathing, then lightly waved his hand. The mist filling the surroundings disappeared. Mok Jiongun muttered softly, I leave the rest to you now. As soon as those words ended, Mok Jiongun's pupils trembled slightly, and then his gaze and atmosphere changed. Chapter 418, Battle of Numbers 6. Juruk. In a dark hall. Blood trickled down the corner of the mouth of a shadowy figure seated on a stone throne. Eventually the being opened its eyes. Not just two eyes but also the third eye on its forehead. Kuruk. The sturdy stone armrest of the throne crumbled helplessly in the being's grip. The being's three eyeballs were tinged with anger. Because it had connected half of its consciousness through an almost identically constructed eyeball, it fully felt the aftermath of the self-destruction. The feeling of instantaneous annihilation. It wasn't a pleasant feeling even for a being that had lived for ages and gone through countless experiences. To lose power like this, even if it's just a part. At a glance, replicating consciousness seemed like creating a completely separate object, but that wasn't exactly the case. It should be seen as connecting and sharing consciousness with the main body. Therefore, part of the power had to be contained, and because it lost the replicated consciousness's eye, it had to lose the power infused there as well. You said it was a perfect move, but the result is not at all. One of the consciousnesses clicked its tongue and spoke. Then the eyeball on the forehead squirmed, and another consciousness expressed its opinion. You know, there was a big variable since you watched together. You're the one who said no variable would be a problem. If it could have been killed easily, we could have resolved it back then 100 years ago. What? Kwang. The being, filled with anger, stomped on the floor. The floor not only cracked, but the entire dark hall shook violently as if an earthquake had occurred. Kururura. As the vibrations of the shaking hall finally stopped, one of the consciousnesses spoke as if to soothe. Calm down, companion. Calm down. Not only have we lost part of our power, but Sowol has fallen into his hands again. And you can say such things? It's not completely lost. What are you trying to say? To that question, one of the consciousnesses spoke in a meaningful voice. Didn't I tell you? He will desperately seek us out. I leave the rest to you now. As soon as those words ended, Mok Jiongun's pupils, which had been full of absolute majesty, trembled slightly, and then his gaze and atmosphere changed. Mok Jiongun, now back to his normal self, looked at his palm covered in burnt ashes from Three Eyes' burst eyeball. What is this? Mok Jiongun was seized by a strange feeling. Last time he felt completely controlled by that being inside him. But this time was different. It felt more like being assimilated. It felt like their wills were in harmony, almost as if it were another self. He had even communicated intentions to it, hadn't he? Deceive him. Indeed, the being inside him had accepted that intention and deceived him. And it willingly returned control of the body. What exactly was the purpose of this being inside him? As his mind was becoming confused, a tremendous cheer erupted from the direction of the square. Wah! It was the cheering of the society members under Mok Jae-eun. They had been worriedly watching the sky even while fighting enemies, thinking Mok Jae-eun was in danger. But when the mist cleared and they saw Three Eyes, or rather young Master Na Yelriang, limp as if dead, they were convinced Mok Jae-eun had won. That's why they were shouting these cheers of victory. Huh. Amidst such cheers, Chun Chu of the First Realm of the Secret Society, who had been facing off against Oh Cheonmu, one of the Seven Heavens and the Master of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, stuck out her tongue with a somewhat surprised look. Even if it wasn't the main body, that Mok Gon lost even after using the Great Void Sealing Technique? The Great Void Sealing Technique was an ancient secret technique that had even sealed the Assassin King of the Sea, one of the 6 demons infinitely close to divine beasts. Naturally, she who had predicted Mok Gon would win couldn't help but be surprised. How could a mere human be this strong? Her gaze towards Mok Jae-eun became strange. Suk. At that moment, Oh Cheonmu pointed his sword at her and said, "It didn't go as you predicted. The tide of battle has turned. Of course, I think you'll continue to fight, but with my lord joining." Before he could finish his words, "I surrender." Chun Chu of the First Realm withdrew her energy and then raised both hands as if she had no intention to fight, saying, "I surrender." At this, Oh Cheonmu frowned, unable to hide his bewilderment. Even though their leader had been defeated, he hadn't expected her to surrender so easily. At the very least, he thought she would act in an unexpected direction or fight desperately, being one who led non-human beings. What kind of trick is this? The leader has lost, so I'm surrendering gracefully. What's tricky about that? It's still suspicious. I should block her energy channels and thoroughly subdue her first to prevent any tricks. Mortal. Pat. At that moment, Chong Ryong, who had recovered some of her spirit power, flew up and approached Mok Jae-eun's side. She too must have been very worried as she showed signs of relief upon seeing Mok Jae-eun safe. Chong Ryong. Really? Chong Ryong, with slightly reddened eyes, was about to say something but then closed her mouth. Then, as if nothing had happened, her eyes filled with resentment again as she looked at Na Yelriang, whose face was held in Mok Jae-eun's hand, and asked, "Did you kill him?" "No. He's not dead." "Don't tell me you're leaving the finishing blow to me to give me a chance to resolve my grudge?" Chong Ryong asked in a tone that suggested she was slightly moved, thinking Mok Jae-eun had considered her feelings. However, Mok Jae-eun shook his head and answered, "I wish that were the case, but not this one." "What do you mean not this one? Mortal, didn't you also acknowledge that this guy is Bai Yong-hyun and that Three Eyes?" "I did, but to be precise, it's not the real consciousness." At this, Chong Ryong asked with an expression of incomprehension. "Not the real consciousness? What do you mean? If it's not real, are you saying it's fake?" "Rather than fake, I should say he constructed his consciousness identically." "Constructed his consciousness identically?" "I'm not sure how he did it, but it seems he can transfer his consciousness and power through the third eye." "The third eye? Are you saying he's not just a Imi Mangniang being capable of simple parasitism?" "Yes, it seems so." Mok Jae-eun had observed the conversation between the being inside him and him. Thanks to that, he learned a bit about Three Eyes but also had some questions. The conversation was so abstract that it was difficult to understand, but it seemed as if the being inside him knew this Three Eyes. Moreover, even this Three Eyes knew the being inside him enough to spew out anger. So this was the reason for that strange sense of dissonance, as if I had killed him but hadn't. Yes, the emotion of desperately wanting something can also be called greed. But how dare you, who arbitrarily took what belongs to me, speak to me about greed? The moment he heard this, strangely enough, what Chong Ryong had said came to mind. The man Chong Ryong had loved in her past life as Ryu Sowol. For some reason, their conversation made him feel as if Chong Ryong's past story was continuing. Could it be? Mok Jae-eun's eyes narrowed. At that moment he heard someone calling out to him from somewhere. "Wayung Master Mok. Please help." Mok Jae-eun looked down in puzzlement at where the cry was coming from. There was a woman covered in wounds, and she was Gio Karayan, the eldest daughter of Sun Rock Valley Master Gi He, who was the most loyal follower and longtime friend of Wai So-yun, the youngest disciple of the Heaven and Earth Society leader. What's going on? Come to think of it, Wai So-yun and most of the factions following her hadn't been seen. But why has Gio Karayan appeared in such a state? As he was wondering, Chong Ryong said, "Hand him over to me and go." Na Yul Riang? Yes. Since his body was controlled by him, he might remember something. Chong Ryong believed that he must know something about him, as three eyes had dwelled in him, even though she didn't disbelieve Mok Jiongun's words. At this, Mok Jiongun nodded and handed the unconscious Na Yul Riang over to her. And then, he landed lightly on the ground where Gio Karayan was. Gio Karayan, with tears welling up in her eyes, spoke in a pleading voice. "Young master, please help. Lady Wai So-yun has been kidnapped by unknown individuals." Kidnapped? Yes, the Bright Blade King and my father, the Sun Rock Valley Master, faced them, but... Sob. She couldn't continue speaking properly as she shed tears. This was because most of the blood on her clothes was her father's. He who had desperately tried to protect Wai So-yun, lost his life with his body cut in half by the enemy's hands. As she recalled her father's last moments, her grief intensified, making it difficult for her to speak properly. Mok Jiongun asked her, "What happened to the sword demon?" This was why Mok Jiongun was puzzled. Although Wai So-yun had her own faction following her, just in case, he had sent the best swordsman, Sword Demon Ji, whom he had recruited as a subordinate from the spiritual sword sanctuary, the sacred land of swordsmanship. Sword Demon. Ji. She understood when he mentioned Ji. Although Ji called himself the Sword Demon, he was more renowned in the world as the mad swordsman obsessed with swords. He sent me to you, young master." "Ji sent you?" Sob. "Yes, Master Ji joined and fought together with the Bright Blade King against that enormously large man, but he's too strong." The Bright Blade King Sun Yun was quite large, but this man was even bigger than him. She had thought they would surely subdue him somehow, as one of the 5 kings and her father and executive and supreme experts at the level of Great Hall Masters had stepped up, but he was a tremendous monster who far overwhelmed them. That's why Ji, who had joined belatedly to help them, hastily sent her to Mok Jiongun. Why? For a moment Mok Jiongun became suspicious. If they were desperately targeting Chong Ryong, it could be understood because Three Eyes was also by Yonghyun. But even though Wai So-yun was Chong Ryong's twin sister and looked exactly like her enough to believe it, she was strictly a different person. So why did they kidnap her? Moreover, Rui was a master of the transformation realm, and the Bright Blade King Sun Yun was also a warrior approaching that level. They didn't deploy forces here that could overwhelm even these individuals fighting together, but used them just to kidnap Wai So-yun? There's something. Mok Jiongun instinctively felt there was a reason why the secret society targeted Wai So-yun. There's no such thing as perfect coincidence in all matters. He had always wondered why she looked so much like Chong Ryong, and it might be related to that secret. So, where? I'll guide. Tell me. Mok Jiongun wrapped his arm around her waist, carried her at his side, and flew up using the treading void technique. Pong. Thus, stepping on the air, Mok Jiongun flew towards Wai So-yun's estate. Someone staggered out from a broken wall of the main building and watched this scene. It was none other than the Heaven and Earth Society leader. So they finally laid hands on that child Wai So-yun.